and welcome to Money, Me and COVID-19, where we talk to subject matter experts about the financial, the economic, the business and the social impacts of coronavirus. My guest today has progressed from making a six-figure income as a stage hypnotist in his early days through to becoming one of the UK's leading experts on buying and selling businesses through his organisation, the Dealmakers Academy. His name is Jonathan J. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Graham. You're certainly going back. You're going back 25 years with that introduction. So, yeah, that's in the dim and distant past. But yeah,
well, I'm not going to let you get your watch chain out and I did a broadcast recently that I called Armageddon or Opportunity in terms of what's going on in the world today. Now, somebody who both operates businesses but also looks for business opportunities, are you leaning towards this being Armageddon or opportunity time?
Well, it's interesting because my first indicator that there was going to be an economic impact to what was going on was the day that I was meant to be drawing down on a considerably large loan facility to finance some acquisitions, some big acquisitions. And I had a phone call from my broker expecting him to say, yeah, the money's on its way. And the phone call was actually, no, they've stopped everything. Jonathan, it's not just you, it's that they've shut down all lending in the last 24 hours. So that was that was an indicator of a sort of a 2008 type of there's a recession on the horizon. Let's just pause. And in fact, the message was we'll review it in 6 weeks. So we'll find out in 3 weeks or so. So there were a few days at that point where I did have my head in my hands, thinking, "Oh my goodness, I'm investing in children's day nurseries, and it looks like they're going to be closed down." And in fact, they were partially. We're still open for the children of key workers, but that can be like 2 or 3 children a day. I mean, it's not very many, and it really did feel like this is a terrible sector to be part of at this moment. When 2020 started so positively, who would have expected less than 3 months later? However, it's actually turned out for the best. It's turned out absolutely fine. So there's some real positives have come out of it. So yeah, I think you do have that opportunity. Do you curl up in a corner and hope for it to all be over, or do you see it as an opportunity to do something you may not have done otherwise?
Well, let's start then with your operational businesses, because clearly, they've been very significantly impacted. So you mentioned that you're staying open for the children of key workers. How does that work out economically? Because there are certain ratios, obviously, in terms of staff and so on, you still have to meet.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this particular sector has benefited from the government pausing business rates for 12 months. And I think there's a general sense that this should have happened a long time ago in this sector, and they may never come back. But at least for the next 12 months, no business rates, which is good. And of course, we operate from large premises. Our nurseries are large ones; they aren't small ones. Then there's the furloughing of staff, which has obviously been very helpful. So we haven't had to make anyone redundant. The staff are at home and being paid. And then the local authorities actually still pay what they would have paid anyway. So on some of the nurseries where we're still implementing a turnaround, so we're still at that sort of, make a little bit of a loss this month, break even next month, still at that sort of very, walking a bit of a tightrope with the finances. In actual fact, it's working really well for us. It's giving us that breathing space to which we wouldn't have had otherwise. So in actual fact, it hasn't been a bad thing. Well, sorry, I'm not trying to make light of the situation, but compared to some businesses, we're okay, and it's given that there's an opportunity to do some of the backroom admin around finance and HR that we would have done anyway, but at the same time as operating a busy business, you kind of gets pushed to the side a little bit. So now we've got the opportunity to do some really detailed financial auditing, which we wouldn't have had time to do otherwise. And then on the acquisition side, that's a whole different matter, but that's actually very positive as well.
Well, you say it's positive, but on the one hand, the funding has dried up. So
Yeah.
how are you able to keep the acquisition side going through this period?
Well, so in actual fact, if that funding had come through on that particular day, we would have completed on the deal the next day. And now, with the benefit of hindsight, we would have massively overpaid. So in actual fact, it stopped us from overpaying for a business, and then there was another one a few days later, but definitely overpaying for that business completing the next day. And as a result, it kind of saved us from that situation. So that actually was one positive. The next is I could go back to all of the acquisitions we had in the pipeline, and of course, everyone being aware of we've got a semi-closed industry, or in many cases closed them completely. All the price points changed. So it allowed us to also renegotiate terms. So anything that we might have been paying on completion, we could explain, well, the banks pulled our funding, at least temporarily, at least for the time being. And therefore, if we want to do this in the foreseeable future, then we both need to be flexible. So it allowed us actually to structure better deals. And thirdly, better deals have come onto the market. So one business that we looked at last year, 500,000 revenue, town centre location, used to be the police station in that town, beautiful, beautiful building, 200,000 for the business inside the building, not for the property, obviously. And we're actually, we're buying that 20,000. So it's reduced in value by 90%, just because of what's happening. Now, clearly, we've got more work to do because we need to build the business back up, let's say September onwards. But we were always prepared to put effort and hard work in anyway. So it really doesn't make too much difference. We'll get our money back very quickly because of the initial investment is so small, £20,000 plus some legals. But so the upside is bigger. So yeah, it's positive, Graham.
Okay, because my impression is obviously one of the things you always look at is businesses that may be getting into some distress and therefore are available at a more reasonable price.
Yeah.
I think what we're seeing at the moment is businesses that were already had, shall we say, underlying health conditions are the ones that are going under, including some very big high street names. Yeah. But I guess the second wave will be businesses that entered this crisis kind of okay-ish, but then as a result of this lockdown of the economy, that's really kind of caused new issues that might mean, paradoxically, that for those who are on the lookout to buy them, there's actually going to be a plethora of deals available coming out the other end of it.
This is going to be huge for people who want to acquire businesses. And it means that you're going to pay very, very reasonable prices. All the inflated prices that you see when the economy feels good, that disappears. So you pay sensible prices. You can get better terms. If you're interested in buying businesses out of administration and saving jobs and saving the business, then those opportunities. One particular IP that I know, he's got over 70 deals happening or 70 administrations happening right now. And that's a lot. Yeah. At any one point, he might have 10 or 12. Yeah. But he's got 70 at this moment in time. And all those businesses need to be bought by someone. Otherwise, everyone loses their jobs. The business closes down. The customers probably lose whatever service or product that they would have bought. So the opportunity is very, very large right now. And the fact that the funding may have dried up for definitely over the next few months I don't really think there is an issue if you are aware of the ways to structure the deal so that you don't need to put either your own money in or maybe very little. You don't need bank borrowing, and you can structure those deals favorably. I mean, the big concern might be, well, what if I'm buying a business that is on such a downward decline that you can never turn it around? But again, that comes down to deal structure. So you can protect yourself so that you never ever overpay, and you can pay your link to performance. And maybe you've got some emotional sellers. You can do something that allows them to share in that upside, so it's not all doom and gloom for them. There is some hope in selling you their business for way below what they might have sold it to you 3 months earlier.
And if you look at the impact of these measures, they really do cut across the entire economy. But as you look at it, can you imagine that there'll be certain sectors where there are some really great opportunities and other sectors where it might be best left well alone as we come out of this?
Yes, I mean, I only know what my clients are doing, and the word on the deal making street, as it were, is that this is there are so many opportunities out there that you can go outside of your usual area at very, very low risk. So let's say you were thinking about buying in a particular sector, or intrigued you or interested you. Well, now is the time to pick up a business for virtually nothing, and experiment with it, and rather than staying in your comfort zone of what you know. So it actually expands the possibilities. I think it comes down to attitude as much as anything. You've got to have the skills and the knowledge. You've got to know what you're doing, and you still have to know how to. You can't be too blunt about this. Actually, I think you need to be more sensitive when speaking to the owner of a business when you're considering buying it. But I also think that you need to have the right attitude and that positive, optimistic outlook. So you need to look for the opportunity and be aware of the downside, but say what might happen. And if you can protect yourself from the downside, then I'd be saying to people, well, if you're going to buy a business, why not do it this year, 2020? Because now is the opportunity with so many options. Well, why not? Why not do it now?
And do you sense that your own strategy might change as a result of this? Might you, for example, either go after bigger groups of nurseries or move beyond the nursery sector because you're seeing all these other opportunities?
Personally, I'm not going to move out of this sector because we're at the beginning of quite a big growth journey, and I don't want to distract myself. Having said that, there are so many groups which might have been nursery groups that might have been very bullish about value and price 3 months ago, but now realize they have to be more sensible. And we are noticing this week, in fact, we're getting a trickle of responses from people who had heard of us being acquisitive in this sector some time ago, and now they're approaching us where clearly before we hadn't been of interest to them. So, I think that the deal making is going to accelerate, and I think it's becoming more and more of a buyer's market. And of course, if you're a buyer in that market, then now is the time to buy, and then become a seller when the economy improves, or at least confidence in the economy improves. And that's where you can sell your group of acquisitions that you made during this period to someone else for a lot more than you bought them. And I think many people will be looking back on this, Graham, and saying that they actually built their group of companies during the coronavirus period.
Well, that's interesting, but I think, as we both know, sometimes the fly in the ointment of getting a business at a sensible valuation is the business broker, the equivalent of the estate agent in the business buying world. Do you think they'll suddenly adopt a sense of reality, of new reality, and start moderating their valuations?
Yeah, and how do I know that? It's because they've started calling me.
Right.
They've called
so that does.
I'm not necessarily the broker's favorite person, because I'm quite vocal about how brokers aren't really helping in the helping, or certainly not helping the buyers, and actually not helping sellers in many cases, but overinflating value. So the £20,000 one that I mentioned earlier, when we said no to the owner last year because he wanted 200,000, he went off and got a broker, and it was a broker who contacted me and said, would you be interested in this business? And first of all, I said, we've already looked at it and we're not interested. And she said, they're asking for £19,995.
Wow.
So in actual fact, something, my thumbs could not type the response to the email on my phone fast enough. So when I spoke to her the next day, the broker this is, I said, so what's happening? And she's saying, we're telling everyone they're not going to get the value they would have got a few weeks ago, and they need to think of this as 2008 all over again. And I said, so what sort of level of interest? She said, no one's buying. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I am. So send me anything else that you've got. And in fact, we're looking at another one with her as well.
So I was going to say, what advice are you giving to Dealmaker Academy members now about what they should be doing? Because it sounds like, once you've had that training and you're kind of up to speed with what to do, suddenly you've got this amazing marketplace to go off and look at.
This is your opportunity to be super successful. That's what it is. And I think we all put excuses in our way to some degree as to why we haven't got the time, we haven't got we don't feel prepared for some reason, we're not mentally in the right place. Well, you need to get over that, because this is the time. This might not come round again. This opportunity might not come around again in our lifetime. So let's create some positivity out of this and create a great business out of it. And if we can rescue some failing businesses along the way, maybe keep the business owner on as an employee. I mean, I don't usually say that, but maybe that's part of the deal structure, so that they can do what they were going to do with the business before all this happened. So I think that if now isn't the time, there never will be a good time.
And I guess a lot of this, if you look at this sort of end-to-end life cycle of one of these transactions where you're buying a business, an awful lot of that can still be done under the present lockdown conditions without having to physically go somewhere. Although ultimately, I suppose, if you've got premises involved, you are going to want to go and see them.
Well, yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, it really depends whether the premises are critical to the business. I mean, whether it's if it's a restaurant, restaurant's quite obvious that the premises is critical. If it's just an office, maybe it's not anyway. I'm a big believer in doing things face to face, but we've all got to adapt. And if we need to do things like this on a Zoom call, then so be it. And solicitors at the moment are accepting scanned copies of documents, where a few weeks ago you'd have to have an original, but now they're accepting scanned. So we're all adapting, and maybe we won't go back. Maybe we'll discover that this is actually a really positive move, and we can save a lot of time with meetings and so forth. Maybe.
Yeah, now, I mean, obviously the government's taken all sorts of steps to help people, but one of the groups of people who really are not receiving any help is directors of small companies who are mainly paying themselves through dividends. Have you got any kind of survival strategies you would suggest for company owners who find themselves in this position where perhaps their revenue's taking a big hit, but they can't sort of furlough themselves? They're stuck there trying to run the business.
It's challenging, isn't it? And I listen to LBC pretty much most of the day. It's on somewhere, So I'm very aware that this is a huge topic of discussion, and no one has found a solution. I mean, the only solutions are fine with the benefit of hindsight. Always have a cash reserve. Things like that, which is all very well saying after the event. And I suppose let's be better prepared for next time. It is difficult. I think though this is an opportunity for business owners to reinvent their business and say, how can we sell this online? I mean, you've seen food wholesalers to restaurants and cafes not being able to sell, and then saying, okay, how can we now sell directly to the consumer? So it's our ability to think outside of the box and say, look, maybe I've always done this in a certain way, but I'm now being forced perhaps to do this in a different way. I mean, that I do these 3-hour introductory seminars around the country for the Dealmakers program. And of course, I can't do them. So beginning of May, we're going to be running Dealmakers seminars online, live seminars, where I can actually interact with people and answer questions. But of course, now we can open up to a worldwide audience. So for years, people have been saying, well, you do something in the States and Australia, and I just really haven't had the time to do that. And now I don't have that excuse anymore. So maybe this actually is something we do in the future. We don't do those live seminars. So I'd say to any business owner watching this, it's one of those things is easier to say than to do, but to think, what could I do differently that maybe I've pulled back on before, that maybe does push me out of my comfort zone. But if I need to generate revenue because I need money to live, whatever it is a month, that's what I need, then necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. So maybe this is the opportunity to reinvent the business and think to yourself, do I need all that office space? People working from home actually, before I was very suspicious as to whether there was productivity when people were working from home, but maybe I can use Basecamp to track activity, and I can run my business based upon results rather than how many hours someone sits in a chair in my office.
No, absolutely. And I think the other thing I can see is this becoming a bit of a watershed moment in terms of people's work-life patterns, because I don't think many people will be missing 3 hours a day commuting into central London on crowded tube trains. So they're going to enjoy being home with their family, and maybe their choice of employer and even the choice of location where they live could change when they have opened their eyes to a different way of working.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think employers who thought that their staff couldn't operate from home are discovering that they can. People who thought, I don't want to work from home, I want to work from an office, are discovering that there are benefits. Speaking of myself, I've got a routine where I go out for a long walk in the morning, then I have a workout, and then I'm ready to go at 9 o'clock. And I never would have done that before. Because I would have been heading off to a meeting somewhere and getting the train at 8 a.m. But now I'm actually doing more exercise as a result of this, and productivity hasn't suffered.
And I guess the other sort of change we could see from this, you and I have often talked about how we need to become more entrepreneurial as a society, is that a whole bunch of people inevitably and sadly going to lose their jobs as a result of what's going on at the moment. Could it be that for them, this is actually the time to switch from being an employee to becoming a business owner?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of many changes that are going to happen. I think there's going to be a rewriting of tax and how tax works with company directors. I think that there are going to be lots of changes around that. I think we're going to become far more of a cashless society far faster. I think that home working will become the norm rather than the exception. There are going to be lots of cultural changes as a result of this. I think that all those meetings that people would spend a day traveling to, and then 45 minutes of chat and then back on the train for a couple of hours, they will go, because now we are proving to ourselves we don't need to. But definitely on the financial front, I think people will evolve the way that they work. And maybe have a split between being employed and being self-employed, so that there's part of their income comes from the company they're currently working for, and part comes from a portfolio of different clients.
I think also that having made that suggestion about employees becoming business owners, I should put a little bit of a health warning on that and say that there's a lot of pitfalls for the unwary when you start looking at buying businesses, and they really do need to get some training and know what they're doing before they go out into that big wide world and come across these liabilities from businesses that have been trading badly. So what would be your kind of summary of what they should be looking at if they're thinking about perhaps going into business ownership for the first time?
So business ownership as in buying a business rather than starting one from scratch. Yeah. So you need to know quite critically whether you're buying assets or shares. I mean, that is going to determine how much pain you have in the future. You also absolutely need to understand due diligence and really to get someone else to do it for you. You need to understand what it is that you're buying. And you need to know how to value what you're buying and then how to structure that value so that you don't have to go and borrow money from a bank and use your principal residence as security. So there are just so many things that can go wrong. And many of the people that I meet on the program have a whole litany of challenges that people tell me how they bought a business, they thought it was going to be easy, and the whole thing just crashed and burnt because they made some very basic mistakes. So I wouldn't be skimping on education or being prepared, because if you do, that is when it goes wrong, and going wrong can be catastrophic, especially if you borrowed £500,000 from the bank, charge over your property, which is the equivalent of a personal guarantee, and as a result, you lose your home. So you really do need to know what you're doing. But having said that, if you buy a business, it's a shortcut to the revenues that might have taken you years to build up if you're doing it by yourself. I mean, if it might take you 5 years to get to £1 million of annual revenue, but you can go and do a deal this summer and buy a business with £1 million of annual revenue, you just say to yourself, 4.5 years of your life, which isn't a bad thing to do.
No, I think that's a really important point to understand. And I think, a lot of people think the only way into business is to have some amazing idea and start something new, when the reality is you can absolutely short circuit it by buying an existing business in something that's, people are already showing a demand for. And I would say, just to give you a plug, that there's a lot of useful information on the Dealmaker Academy site, and it's worth starting there if people want to get their heads around what's involved in buying a business. So finally, excuse me, Jonathan, I think the impression I'm getting from you is that, if anything, you're veering towards this being a time of opportunity, and that really it could even prove to be a sort of once-in-a-generation chance to buy some really potentially strong businesses for a very low entry price.
This is an incredible opportunity. And if you don't look at it like that, then you are you've only got yourself to blame, really. You have a choice over how you perceive events, and you can choose to be depressed by what's happening and see all the negatives, or you can say, well, actual fact, there is a business opportunity here, and I need to grab it with both hands because my family will thank me for it. And this is the opportunity to create the wealth that you talk about a lot, Graham. And then you take that money and you reinvest it, and you reinvest it in all the places that you talk about. And you could actually secure your family's future over the next year or so by being smart with business acquisition.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great place to end on. Jonathan J., thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.